Before the world hummed with electricity, before the tick of the clock dictated when to rise and when to rest, there was only the slow turning of the earth and the rhythm of the sun and moon. In those quiet, shadowed centuries of the medieval age, sleep did not come in one solid, unbroken block the way it does for most people today. Instead, it arrived in two gentle waves, known to those who lived then as the first sleep and the second sleep. When darkness fell, families would retire soon after sunset. There was no television, no lamp, and no bright streetlights spilling through their shutters. Only the fading glow of a hearth fire or a single tallow candle. People ate their final meal early, prayed together, and then lay down on straw mattresses or wooden frames covered with rough linen sheets. The first sleep began early, around 8 or 9 in the evening, and it was deep and dreamless, a surrender to exhaustion after long days of work in fields, workshops, or kitchens. The air would be still, except for the crackle of firewood and the soft rhythm of breathing. After 4 or 5 hours, many would wake naturally, not from noise or discomfort, but as if summoned by some inner clock. This waking period could last an hour or more. Men and women would stir quietly, tend the fire, visit the privy, or sit and think in the dim half-light of embers. It was not a time of fear or disturbance. It was normal. Children might whisper to parents. Couples might talk softly, share stories, or turn to each other for intimacy. Some medieval medical texts even recommended this interval as the best time for conception, when the body was warm and relaxed. Monks in abbeys and convents took this wakeful time to rise for matins, their sacred midnight prayers. For the medieval mind, this division of the night carried deep meaning. The period between first and second sleep was a sacred stillness and opportunity to reflect, confess, and feel close to the divine. The darkness outside was total. No candle could fully banish it. People believed that the night itself was alive with spirits, saints, and the restless souls of the dead. To wake in this liminal hour was to stand between worlds, not fully in the realm of dreams, but not entirely in the world of the living either. Letters and diaries from across medieval Europe confirm this pattern. A 13th century French physician described the human body's natural first sleep and second sleep in England. Historian Roger Eckarch later uncovered dozens of references spoke of first sleep in casual conversation, and priests mentioned it in confessional guidance. Even court records from that era note crimes or events that occurred after the first sleep, implying that everyone knew what that meant. The evidence was everywhere, hiding in plain sight. During this middle-of-the-night wakefulness, people didn't simply lie still. Some used the time for work, spinning wool, writing letters, mending clothes, or checking on animals in the barn. Farmers might listen to the weather or the sound of rain and plan the next day's chores. For city folk, the streets were almost entirely dark, but the moonlit hours gave thieves and wanderers their chance to move unseen. Yet even among them, this rhythm was understood. The night was divided. The human body followed its natural tide. In villages, this shared rhythm gave everyone a sense of connection. Imagine it. Thousands of homes scattered across the countryside, all dark and silent at first, and then, around midnight, tiny flickers of light appearing one by one, candles. Fires poked back to life, people whispering in the stillness. For a brief time, the world seemed awake together again, but in quiet reverence rather than noise. It was a pattern as old as humanity itself, probably dating back long before written history. Scientists today have recreated this phenomenon in sleep experiments. When modern volunteers live without artificial light, they often fall into the same patterns, leaping for hours, waking for an hour or two, and then falling asleep again until dawn. It suggests that the medieval system of first and second sleep wasn't cultural fantasy. It was biological truth. The human brain, in pure darkness, naturally splits the night in half. During those waking intervals, dreams were often remembered and discussed. People believed the first dreams of the night were influenced by the day's events, while the dreams after the second sleep carried messages or omens. Wise women, midwives, and priests sometimes interpreted these dreams. It was thought that the middle hour, when a person rose and prayed, cleansed the mind, allowing the second round of sleep to bring more peaceful visions. Some even claimed that demons could slip into the dreams of those who ignored the sacred duty to rise and pray during the night's middle. Yet, this rhythm of life began to fade as the centuries rolled forward. By the 17th century, city life was changing. Candles became cheaper, and people began staying awake longer after sunset. Wealthier families dined late, played cards, read poetry, or visited friends into the night. As society learned to stretch the evening hours, bedtime crept closer to midnight, leaving no room for a long pause between two sleeps. Gradually, the idea of segmented sleep disappeared. By the time industrialization swept across Europe, with factories running on rigid schedules and mornings dictated by whistles, the very concept of first and second sleep had become strange and old-fashioned. But in that earlier world, night was not an enemy, was a companion. Medieval people understood darkness as part of life's rhythm. They feared it, yes, but also found comfort in its quiet. With the stars blazing overhead and only the sound of wind through thatched roofs, they rested in ways we can scarcely imagine today. Sleep was not just rest, it was a ritual. Even in the poorest homes, where people slept side by side on straw mats, the night had a texture mix of smoke, wool, and the smell of earth. Families might huddle together for warmth. In castles and monasteries, thick curtains were drawn around beds to block the cold drafts and wandering eyes. The silence between first and second sleep was broken only by the groan of wood, the call of a night bird, or the soft murmur of prayer. It's easy to imagine a peasant woman rising quietly, her breath misting in the cold, feeding the fire so her children wouldn't wake shivering, or a scribe bent over parchment by candlelight, writing a few more lines while his household slept. In those hours, the world was slower, softer, more human. They didn't know insomnia as we know it. They expected to wake. It wasn't restlessness. It was life's natural pause. The return to bed for the second sleep was like a descent into deeper dreams. People often described it. By dawn, when the rooster crowed and the sky turned pale blue, the household would stir again, refreshed. Today, we see their habits as weird, but perhaps the joke is on us. With our endless screens, artificial lights, and 24-hour schedules, we've lost that tender balance between darkness and dawn. Medieval people, for all their ignorance and superstition, might have known something we've forgotten: that the night has its own rhythm, and the body its own wisdom. So the next time you wake up in the middle of the night and think something's wrong, remember your ancestors. In their world, that quiet moment was sacred, a time to breathe, think, pray, or simply be. You're not broken, you're medieval. In the medieval world, night was not simply the absence of light. It was another country with its own rules, dangers, and sacred moments. As the sun sank below the horizon, people entered a world ruled by candlelight, superstition, and silence. They believed that sleep was more than rest. It was a crossing between the physical and spiritual realms. Dreams were omens. Shadows were messengers. The waking hour between first and second sleep was not a time to fear, but a time to listen. When darkness fell, the village changed its shape. What had been familiar in daylight, the well, the barns, the church steeple, became strange under the cloak of night. Most windows were shuttered tight. Those few who stepped outside would move slowly, guided only by starlight or a faint lantern glow. The silence was deep enough to hear the rustle of straw or the distant bark of a dog. In such silence, the imagination awakened. People heard voices in the wind, footsteps in the empty lane, whispers in the thatch above their heads. For a medieval mind, the line between the living and the spirit world was thinnest at night. This was why prayers before bed were not just customs, they were protection. Men and women crossed themselves and muttered charms like, "Now I lay me down to sleep," not as a gentle rhyme, but as a defense against demons, fairies, or the souls of the restless dead. Superstitions ran deep. Never leave a candle burning after midnight, or it may invite. Never whistle in the dark, or you might call something that listens back. Sleep was a surrender, and the night was filled with invisible company. Yet, for all the fear surrounding it, the medieval night was also a time of intimacy and imagination. Without artificial light, the stars burned brighter than we can ever see today. The Milky Way stretched like a silver road across the sky, and people often stared upward before sleep, making stories out of constellations. The night sky was their ceiling and their calendar, guiding planting seasons, marking holy festivals, and setting the rhythm for the entire year. Even the phases of the moon influenced sleep. It was said that on a full moon, people's dreams were stronger, stranger, and often prophetic. Inside homes, the fire was the heart of life. Its warmth was comfort, but its dying glow marked the passage of hours. The faint crackle of burning logs, the smell of smoke, and the flickering orange light made walls seem to move, creating ghostly shapes that both comforted and unsettled the mind. Many medieval people believed that dreams were born from what the eyes last saw, the firelight, the shadows, the faces of family. As they drifted back into their second sleep, those images followed them into their dreams. Dreams themselves were treated with great seriousness. A knight might dream of a black horse and take it as a warning before battle. A woman might dream of a bird in her hand and interpret it as a sign of new love or pregnancy. Monks and scholars often wrote down their dreams, believing that God spoke to the faithful in visions of the night. Books like The Dream of Scipio or Somniel Danielis, the dream book of Daniel, offered long lists of symbols, what it meant to dream of fire, water, death, or flight. For peasants who could not read, village-wise women often filled the role of dream interpreters. A good dream could bring comfort to an entire household. A bad one might call for prayer, confession, or burning of herbs. During the waking hour, between sleeps, people might discuss their dreams softly before returning to bed. It was believed that to speak of a nightmare in the middle of the night could lessen its power. To name a fear was to weaken it. Families shared dreams as naturally as they shared bread, turning them into lessons or warnings. Children learned early to pay attention to what they saw in their sleep. In this way, the culture of dreams shaped both religion and routine outside the safety of homes. The medieval night had a life of its own. The world was quieter, but not still. Watchmen patrolled city gates and castle walls. Thieves and smugglers used the dark to move unseen. Night soil collectors, men tasked with cleaning latrines, worked their grim trade while others slept. In monasteries, monks shuffled through stone corridors with lanterns, chanting prayers that echoed through the halls. Even animals behaved differently. Cats prowled for mice, dogs barked at unseen shapes, and owls hooted from the rafters. The medieval soundscape was full of whispers, calls, and echoes, all softened by the blanket of darkness. The division of night into two halves created a natural rhythm for these nocturnal lives. The first half belonged to rest, the second half to quiet work or reflection. In some towns, bakers began kneading dough during the second sleep hours so that fresh bread could be sold by morning. Blacksmiths sometimes rose early to stoke their forges before sunrise. For the poor, this split sleep allowed flexibility. They could wake to tend fires, fetch water, or check animals without disturbing the entire household. In noble houses and castles, the luxury of night looked different. Great chambers glowed with candles and tapestries. Servants slept near the walls, ready to fetch wine or cloaks for their lords. Nobles might entertain guests late into the night with music, gambling, or storytelling. Yet, even among them, the rhythm of first and second sleep remained. After an evening of laughter and song, the halls would go silent, only for a faint stir of voices to rise again when the first sleep ended. In those moments, even the mighty felt the stillness of the medieval night, a silence shared by king and peasant alike. One of the most curious aspects of this rhythm was how it shaped emotions. Historians studying diaries and letters from the 14th and 15th centuries noticed that people often wrote about feeling calmer, more reflective, and more spiritual during the hours between sleeps. Some described sudden insights, a sense of clarity, or an urge to pray. Others spoke of feeling closer to their hearts. Modern sleep researchers now know that during this middle waking period, the brain releases prolactin, a hormone that produces calm and contentment. Without electric light, medieval people experienced a natural chemical peace we rarely feel today. Religious life also revolved around this cycle. Monks designed their routines around the night's divisions. The ringing of bells called them to matins or vigils just after midnight, aligning perfectly with the end of the first sleep. They would chant psalms, light candles, and meditate before returning to bed for the second sleep. It was a sacred synchronization between body and belief. Even ordinary villagers mirrored this rhythm in miniature, waking for a quiet prayer before returning to rest. In art and literature, night carried symbolic weight. Painters portrayed the Virgin Mary or saints under starlit skies, emphasizing serenity. Poets described sleep as death's cousin, gentle, mysterious, inevitable. The still hours between sleeps became metaphors for the soul's journey, waking to reflect, sleeping again to be renewed. For medieval Christians, the rhythm of two sleeps echoed the rhythm of faith itself: sin and confession, death and resurrection, night and dawn. The psychology of sleep in that era was also tied to morality. Too much sleep was seen as laziness, too little as spiritual pride. Waking naturally between sleeps was considered balanced, neither indulgent nor excessive. Physicians of the time advised that one should not eat or drink too close to bedtime, that one's head should face north for better dreams, and that linen sheets be aired daily to prevent illness. Sleep was both a medical prescription and a moral act. As we look back, it's astonishing how this simple, peaceful rhythm vanished so completely from human memory. The introduction of cheap lighting in the 17th and 18th centuries, first oil lamps, then gas, then electric bulbs, transformed night into a second day. People began staying awake later, working later, and sleeping in one continuous block. The old words first sleep and second sleep disappeared from conversation. By the 19th century, anyone waking at midnight was said to be suffering from insomnia, when, for thousands of years, it had been the most natural thing in the world. If one were to travel back in time, the medieval night might feel terrifying at first. The total darkness, the silence, the feeling of isolation. But stay long enough, and it would begin to feel oddly comforting. The world slowed down, the stars returned, the mind, freed from endless distraction, began to wander inward. People lived closer to the earth's rhythm, sleeping not by the clock, but by instinct. This forgotten pattern reminds us of something profound, that human beings were never meant to live by constant light. The night was not an interruption. It was part of life's design. Within it, people prayed, dreamed, and healed. The first sleep took away exhaustion. The second restored the spirit. And between them lay a sacred hour, where one might meet one's own thoughts, one's fears, and perhaps even one's soul. So when you wake in the quiet middle of the night and wonder why, don't reach for your phone or curse the hour. Think of your medieval ancestors, rising from their beds, sitting beside a faint fire, whispering prayers in the darkness. They too listened to the silence, felt the pulse of the world slowing, and waited for the peace of the second sleep. What they knew, and what we've forgotten, is that the night was not something to conquer, but something to share. When the first sleep ended and the quiet, wakeful hour began, not everyone stayed within the safety of their homes. Across medieval Europe, the night belonged to a special kind of person, the night watcher. These men, sometimes hired by towns or churches, walked the cobbled streets with lanterns, staffs, and bells. Their job was to keep order while the rest of the town slept, to warn of fires, thieves, or spirits wandering too close to the living. But being a night watcher in those times was more than a duty. It was an encounter with the very heart of the medieval nighttime encounter with fear, faith, and the strange habits of sleeping humanity. A night watcher's world was a mixture of shadow and silence. The streets were empty, except for the sound of his boots and the faint hiss of his torch in the mist. Wooden shutters sealed most homes, but occasionally he would see a faint light through a crack, a sign that someone was awake between first and second sleep. He might hear the muffled hum of prayer or the whimper of a child. Sometimes the watcher called out the hour, past midnight, and all is well. But sometimes he didn't, for the night was unpredictable, and superstition ruled even the most practical men. A sudden gust of wind or the echo of his own footsteps could send chills down his spine. He, too, was human. He, too, feared what might lurk in the dark. For those lying in bed, half dreaming between sleeps, the night could play tricks. The stillness magnified every creak, every whisper. A mouse scurrying under straw might sound like a thief. The moan of wind through the thatch might be mistaken for a ghost. People told stories of night hags, malevolent beings who sat upon a sleeper's chest and stole their breath. We now call it sleep paralysis, but in the Middle Ages, it was considered proof that demons or witches walked the night. Many households hung iron keys or small crosses above their beds to protect against such nocturnal attacks. If a person woke, unable to move, they believed they were under demonic pressure, what they called the mare, from which the word nightmare was born. Beds themselves were far from the cozy sanctuaries we imagine today. For peasants, they were crude wooden frames or piles of hay covered with blankets of wool or fur. Families often shared the same bed, parents, children, sometimes even servants. In winter, this closeness was essential for warmth. In noble homes, however, beds were grand symbols of status. They were enormous, carved from oak or walnut, with heavy curtains to block drafts and maintain privacy. Feather mattresses, fine linen sheets, and embroidered canopies marked wealth and power. Visitors were often received not in sitting rooms but in the lord's bedchamber, where business, gossip, and even royal audiences could take place. The bed was both throne and stage. Despite such differences, sleep was deeply communal. Privacy, as we know it, did not exist. People snored, muttered, dreamed aloud. Children might roll against their parents. Servants might sleep nearby on mats. The warmth, smell, and sound of shared breathing formed a kind of nightly symphony. If one person stirred during the midnight wakeful hour, often others did too. They might speak quietly, share water or bread, and then drift back into dreams together. Sleepwalking too fascinated the medieval mind. Those who rose and walked in their sleep were believed to be caught between worlds, part body, part spirit. If you saw a sleepwalker, you must never wake them, people said, or their soul might never return. Instead, the custom was to guide them gently back to bed, whispering prayers to protect them from demons. In some regions, villagers even left their doors unbolted at night, fearing that locking a sleepwalker out might anger the spirits guiding them. To modern eyes, this seems naive, but in an age when the line between waking and dreaming was sacred, such caution made perfect sense. The darkness also held opportunities for crime and secrecy. Lovers met under the cover of the moon. Servants slipped food from the kitchen. Thieves crept through unlocked doors, guided by memory rather than sight. Many medieval legal records mention crimes committed after the first sleep, a phrase so common that it needed no explanation. There were also stories, half legends, half truth, of monks who broke their vows under the spell of night, sneaking into villages or confessing to temptations that rose when the world was quiet. To be awake between sleeps was to stand at the edge of temptation and revelation alike. Religion wrapped itself tightly around these nocturnal fears. The church taught that demons worked hardest at night, when the soul was weakest. Midnight was sometimes called the devil's hour, the moment when evil forces moved most freely. But in contrast, the hours before dawn were believed to be sacred, when angels guarded the faithful. This idea created a nightly battle, a cosmic war, fought in silence while the world slept. People prayed before bed, not only for rest, but for protection, reciting verses like "Deliver us from the terrors of the night." Priests blessed bedrooms with holy water. Families hung crucifixes or relics near pillows. Even the position of sleeping mattered. Lying on the right side was thought to bring peaceful dreams, while lying on the left invited restless ones. Interestingly, not all nights were equal. The seasons shaped how people slept. In summer, when the sun lingered late and dawn came early, first and second sleep grew shorter. But in the depths of winter, when darkness reigned for 16 hours, people slept long and often. They rose multiple times in the night to stoke fires, check animals, or simply sit in reflection. The rhythm of sleep flowed with nature itself. Doctors and philosophers of the medieval era also theorized about sleep. The body, they said, contained 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And sleep was how those humors balanced. Too much wakefulness could dry the brain and cause madness. Too much sleep could drown it in phlegm. Physicians advised sleeping on full stomachs was harmful, for digestion boiled the humors, creating bad dreams. A good night's rest required moderation in all things: light food, clean air, and moral thoughts before bed. Even nightmares had medical explanations. They were caused by vapors rising from the stomach to the head. Yet, no matter the theory, sleep remained something mysterious, both physical and spiritual, both healing and haunting. The night watchers, those lonely guardians, saw more than anyone else. They witnessed births and deaths, crimes and miracles. In plague years, their calls echoed through empty streets, warning of sickness. During storms, they braved winds to keep fires from spreading. They also became witnesses to strange nocturnal phenomena: glowing lights over churchyards, figures vanishing into mist, or voices that seemed to come from nowhere. Many such tales were retold by candlelight the next day, growing with each telling. The medieval night was fertile ground for stories, but perhaps the strangest part of all was how ordinary people accepted these mysteries. They did not question whether the dead could walk or angels could whisper in dreams. For them, the world was full of unseen forces, and night was when those forces stirred. Their sleep habits reflected this belief. Waking in the night was not something to fix. It was an invitation to reflect. Dreaming was not meaningless. It was communication from another realm, and light itself was precious, even holy. A single candle could turn terror into peace. As dawn approached, a quiet transformation occurred. The darkness faded into blue, and the sounds of morning returned. Roosters crowing, carts creaking, church bells ringing. People rose slowly from their second sleep, often thanking God for surviving another night. The morning prayer, matutinum, was both gratitude and relief. In towns, bakers opened their ovens. In farms, animals were fed. the world came alive again, shaking off the stillness of sleep. If one could stand on a hill and watch the whole countryside in those early hours, one would see smoke rising from chimneys, hear distant bells, and feel the hum of life returning. The medieval night had ended, but its quiet wisdom remained in every yawn and stretch. For those who lived then, sleep was not a simple necessity, was part of the soul's rhythm, a nightly journey between fear and faith, body and spirit, darkness and dawn. Today, we shut ourselves off from that rhythm. Our nights glow with screens. Our rooms hum with electricity. We fear waking in the dark, calling it insomnia, when our ancestors would have called it perfectly natural. They knew that the body is not a machine to be switched off. It's a living thing that ebbs and flows with the night. They accepted the silence, the shadows, even the strange shapes that danced behind closed eyes. In their world, sleep was both medicine and mystery. Perhaps that's the lesson buried in their habits, to see night not as the absence of day, but as its partner, to listen to the stillness between sleeps, where thoughts drift like smoke and dreams whisper of forgotten truths. The medieval people did not conquer the dark. They lived with it, breathed with it, and found peace in its rhythm. So, if you ever wake in the small hours and feel the world holding its breath, think of them, the peasants on straw beds, the monks in stone halls, the night watcher walking his lonely path. You are not alone. You are simply part of an ancient cycle, one that once governed all humanity. The night, after all, still remembers. If you could travel back in time to a medieval village at night, the first thing you would notice is how quiet the world felt. The silence would not be soft and cozy, it would be thick, deep, and absolute. There were no humming fridges, no ticking clocks, no faint buzz of distant traffic. Only the wind sighing through trees and the occasional crackle of a dying hearth. Inside small cottages, where families slept shoulder to shoulder, the air would be warm and smoky from the fire. It was here, in these humble spaces, that people surrendered to the night on beds that were far from the comforts we take for granted. Today, medieval beds were often nothing more than piles of straw, hay, or dried leaves laid across the floor or on simple wooden frames. Poor families stuffed their bedding into sacks made from rough linen, which is where the phrase "hit the sack" actually comes from. Over time, that hay became flattened and dusty, and it had to be replaced often, or else it would attract fleas and mice. The smell of sweat, smoke, and livestock mixed in the air, for many people slept in the same room as their animals. The body heat of cows, goats, or chickens actually kept homes warmer through the brutal European winters. A bed wasn't a private luxury, it was a shared necessity. In richer homes, the picture changed only slightly. The wealthy slept on raised wooden frames with rope lattice to hold a mattress of feathers, straw, or wool. The phrase "sleep tight" comes from the need to regularly tighten these ropes so the bed wouldn't sag in the middle. Nobles covered their mattresses with sheets made of linen, and sometimes furs or embroidered blankets for warmth. The headboard was often carved wood, and above it hung heavy curtains, not just for decoration, but to block cold drafts and insects. A noble's bed was both furniture and status symbol. It was large enough that servants could sleep at the foot, and some even had canopies with embroidered family crests. For the poor, a bed was something to collapse onto after a day of toil. For the rich, it was an extension of power and comfort. Yet, regardless of wealth, sleep was rarely a private act. Entire families often shared the same bed, sometimes with servants or guests. Privacy was a luxury reserved for lords and ladies, and even then, not always guaranteed. In rural villages, space was scarce, and warmth was survival. A peasant mother might sleep with her children beside her, the youngest closest to her chest for warmth, while the father lay near the edge to guard the door. In some homes, strangers were even invited to share a bed when traveling, as inns were few and dangerous roads made overnight shelter a necessity. Though awkward to us, this was normal. Then sleep was communal, not personal. The arrangement of sleeping spaces also revealed social hierarchy. In manor houses, servants often slept in the hallways, kitchens, or near the stables. Monks slept in long dormitories lined with wooden cots, while nuns had small, plain chambers. Their beds, little more than wooden boards covered with a thin layer of straw. Every aspect of the medieval bed, its material, its placement, its size, reflected one's place in society. The bed, humble or grand, was a symbol of life's order. Cleanliness was another matter entirely. The medieval world didn't know about dust mites or germs, but it did know discomfort. People shook out their bedding to get rid of pests, yet fleas and lice were constant companions. Wealthier individuals burned herbs, like lavender or rosemary, under their mattresses to mask the smell of sweat and repel insects. Some even scattered mint leaves or dried flowers between their sheets. Servants washed linens only a few times a year because the process was expensive and time-consuming. Water had to be carried, boiled, and mixed with harsh soaps made from animal fat and ash. For many, the bed was also where they were born, where they prayed, and where they died. It was both a cradle and a coffin, an intimate part of human existence that followed a person from their first breath to their last. A bed wasn't just a place to rest it. In noble houses, births were witnessed by midwives and servants beside the same bed where the lady of the house would one day take her final breath. The bed carried memory and meaning. Even more peculiar were the sleeping arrangements outside the home. Travelers and monks often had to rest in cold, open halls where straw was spread on stone floors. Some monasteries practiced communal silence, where dozens of men lay side by side without uttering a word, their breathing echoing through the dark. Pilgrims might find lodging in roadside hospices, sleeping beside strangers who snored, coughed, or prayed into the night. For the weary soul, even this rough rest was a blessing. As the centuries passed, bedmaking slowly evolved. By the late Middle Ages, people began to experiment with feather-filled mattresses and wool padding. In royal courts, beds became extravagant displays, draped with silk and velvet, guarded by ornate bedposts carved with gold. Some beds were so large they required steps to climb into, but still, beneath all that finery, sleep remained raw and human. Even kings and queens sweated through hot nights, shivered in cold winters, and stirred restlessly as dreams flickered across their minds. What's fascinating is how the idea of a comfortable bed has always been relative. The softest feather mattress of a medieval noble would still feel lumpy and rough to us. The average modern mattress, with its springs, foam, and layered softness would have seemed magical to them. Yet, despite their hard sleeping conditions, medieval people often slept soundly. Their bodies were used to physical labor, their minds unburdened by the constant stimulation of modern life. When darkness fell, there were no distractions, no glowing screens, no caffeine-fueled nights, no schedules to keep. Sleep came easily, like a stone sinking into deep water. The bed, then, was a small world unto itself. In its creaks and groans, in its warmth and roughness, it reflected the simplicity of medieval life. Each night, as people lay beneath coarse blankets, they closed their eyes to the same stars that we still see today. Their dreams drifted through time, carried by candlelight and whispered prayers. And though we might pity their discomfort, perhaps they rested more peacefully than we do, bound not by deadlines or alarms, but only by the ancient rhythm of darkness and dawn. When the medieval night began to settle, it wasn't as simple as blowing out a candle and collapsing into bed. Sleep, for the people of those centuries, was an event, something surrounded by rituals, fears, and small acts of faith. For them, the darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living thing, filled with the presence of spirits, saints, and shadows. As the sun disappeared behind the hills and the last work of the day was done, people began preparing for the long hours ahead. Guided not by clocks, but by instinct and superstition, the first task of the evening was securing the home. In a world without locks, as we know them, people barred the door by placing heavy wooden beams across it or stacking stones. The sound of that bar sliding into place was a comforting one. The day was over. The family was safe. Windows, if there were any, were covered with shutters or thick cloth. In poorer cottages, the single room that served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom transformed itself into a sleeping area. Straw mats were spread, the fire was banked low, and livestock were sometimes brought indoors for warmth and safety. Before lying down, people turned to prayer. Religion was the heart of medieval life, and the night was a time of vulnerability when souls felt closest to the unseen. Even the simplest peasant would cross themselves before sleep, whispering, "Now I lay me down to rest. May the Lord watch over my soul." Monks, following strict monastic schedules, recited Compline, the final service of the day, filled with psalms, asking for divine protection through the darkness. In noble homes, chaplains might lead entire families in prayer before retiring to their chambers. For everyone, the night held both peace and fear, and prayer was their shield. Once prayers were said, there came the small, practical rituals of comfort. Candles were extinguished carefully. Each flame meant money, as wax and tallow were costly. A single candle might be left burning in the corner, both to provide light and to ward off evil spirits. Some families placed a bowl of holy water near the bed, and others drew crosses on the wall with chalk or soot. In some regions, people placed iron objects like scissors or knives near infants, believing that iron repelled witches and demons. For travelers spending the night in unfamiliar inns, the rituals grew even more elaborate. They sprinkled salt near the door or muttered protective charms. For the night was considered dangerous away from home. Cleanliness was not ignored either, though it meant something different than it does today. Before sleeping, many washed their hands and faces in cool water. The wealthy used scented oils or rose water. while peasants used simple water from the well. This small act was not just practical, it was spiritual cleansing. They believed that going to bed unwashed invited bad dreams, and that water purified both the body and the soul. Children were taught to go to sleep with a clean heart and clean hands. As the fire dimmed, families gathered closer. It was common for people to talk quietly before sleeping, discussing the day's events, telling stories, or singing hymns. In villages, this storytelling time was precious. Without books or entertainment, tales were passed from one generation to another, beside the glow of the hearth. Ghost stories were especially popular, though they were told in whispers, half in fear and half in fascination. These stories gave shape to the invisible world around them, the spirits of the dead, the fair folk who wandered at night, and the saints who protected the faithful. The darkness outside seemed alive, and the stories kept it company. In noble castles, bedtime was a more structured affair. Servants prepared the Lord's chamber long before he entered it. They warmed stones or bricks by the fire and wrapped them in cloth to place at the foot of the bed. Perfumed herbs like lavender, rosemary, or chamomile were scattered between the sheets to mask the smell of unwashed linen. Curtains were drawn around the bed to keep in warmth and privacy. Some nobles even slept in their underclothes, while others preferred to sleep nude, believing it healthier. A servant would help the Lord undress, kneeling to remove boots and cloak, while another stood by with a candle as the master recited his evening prayer. When the room was ready, all lights were dimmed, and silence fell except for the occasional creak of wood or murmur of distant voices echoing through the stone halls. For monks and nuns, the approach to sleep was deeply spiritual. Silence was mandatory. Before retiring, they confessed sins or recited psalms in unison. The monastery's long dormitory, lined with wooden cots, would soon fill with the sound of slow, steady breathing, but their sleep was always brief. Within a few hours, the bells would ring for matins, calling them to rise and pray in the middle of the night. Even their rest was governed by devotion. There were also customs linked to dreams. Medieval people believed that dreams were not random, they carried meaning. Some thought that eating certain foods before bed could influence what they saw in their sleep. Cheese, for example, was believed to cause strange or frightening dreams. Warm milk and honey, however, were said to bring peaceful rest. Before bed, some people avoided heavy meat, fearing it stirred unquiet spirits in the body. Physicians of the time wrote entire guides about proper sleep conduct, advising people to lie first on their right side for digestion, then turn to the left to complete the process. Sleeping on the stomach was discouraged, was considered sinful or unhealthy. Animals, too, played their part in the nightly rhythm. Cats were welcomed as keepers of warmth and hunters of mice. Dogs lay by the door, serving as both protector and companion. The flickering fire, the breathing of animals, and the slow rhythm of human sleep merged into a single sound, a kind of natural lullaby that filled the dark with comfort. Superstitions wove through all these habits like invisible threads. People believed that leaving shoes upside down invited bad luck, or that one should never sleep with their head facing north. In some regions, open mirrors were covered before bed to prevent spirits from entering through the reflection. Women in childbirth or illness were thought to be most vulnerable to nocturnal spirits. so prayers were often recited specifically for them each evening. Even the simple act of turning over in bed could carry meaning. To roll from right to left without prayer was considered disrespectful to angels. For those who suffered sleeplessness, what we might call insomnia, the remedies were strange, but surprisingly thoughtful. Doctors recommended listening to soft music, drinking warm ale mixed with honey, or reading religious verses. Another common cure was placing a piece of bread blessed by a priest under the pillow to bring calm dreams. If sleep still would not come, people accepted it as God's will. The night was mysterious, and wakefulness was seen as an opportunity to reflect rather than a problem to solve. As the hours stretched on, candles flickered out one by one. Children drifted into dreams, their parents following soon after. The fire sank to embers, glowing red in the darkness. Beyond the walls, the world lay utterly still. The forests, the fields, the sleeping beasts of night. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell might toll the late hour, marking time for no one in particular. The medieval world had surrendered to the night, wrapped in its rituals, prayers, and fears. It is easy to imagine that. In those moments before the first sleep took hold, there was a quiet sense of belonging, a recognition that every night was a small death, and every morning a rebirth. They closed their eyes, knowing that dawn would return, as it always had. Imagine for a moment that you are lying in a small wooden cottage somewhere in the countryside of 14th century England. The fire has burned down to a dull orange glow. The last prayer has been whispered, and everyone in your home has drifted into the first sleep. The night feels thicker than ink. It is a darkness that modern eyes can barely comprehend. No streetlights, no faint horizon glow, no hum of faraway cars. It is complete, ancient, and alive. To the medieval sleeper, this was not silence. It was a world filled with sound, texture, and mystery. As the body settled onto rough straw bedding, the night began to sing its strange, endless song. You could hear the faint rustle of animals shifting in their stalls, the creak of the wooden beams, the sigh of wind through the thatch. Sometimes a rooster crowed too early, mistaking the moonlight for dawn. Dogs barked in the distance, sometimes warning of a stranger, sometimes barking at nothing at all. To medieval ears, these were not background noises, they were messages, signs, and omens. Many believed the night belonged to spirits. When the wind moaned through the trees, they said it was the wandering souls of the unburied dead. An owl's cry was considered a warning of death, especially if it perched near a house. The hoot of an owl at midnight could send shivers through even the bravest men. Wolves howled in forests, and though their numbers were small in much of Europe, their voices carried miles across valleys. For villagers, the howl of a wolf was both terrifying and strangely comforting. It reminded them that the wilderness still existed beyond their walls, that nature still ruled most of the world inside. However, the sounds were closer, more intimate. The symphony of a medieval household was a mix of snoring, whispering, and breathing. Families shared one room, sometimes one bed, so the night was never truly quiet. Children turned in their sleep. Straw crackled under shifting bodies, and someone always coughed or murmured in a dream. In wealthier homes, servants slept nearby on pallets or benches, rising in the night to tend fires or fetch water. The crack of settling timber, the drip of melting candle wax, and the faint scurrying of mice made up the heartbeat of medieval darkness. What modern people might find uncomfortable, the closeness, the constant noise was, for medieval folk, deeply reassuring. Silence, true silence, was frightening. It meant something unnatural had happened. Even monasteries, where silence was sacred, had their own night sounds. The shuffling of robes, the echo of a distant bell, the soft chanting of brothers rising for matins. These noises were the rhythm of life, and in their repetition lay peace. There were other, stranger sounds, the ones that could not be explained. The medieval night was full of folklore about things that moved when no one was looking. Travelers told of ghostly processions that passed through villages at midnight. Known as the Wild Hunt, in some regions, people believed that on certain nights, the souls of the dead rode across the sky, their cries carried by the wind. If you heard them, you were never to look out the window, for their gaze could bring madness or misfortune. To protect themselves, people placed charms near their beds, crosses made of straw, iron knives, or small relics blessed by priests. The belief in these protections was strong. If something creaked or tapped in the dark, they whispered a prayer or made the sign of the cross. Even the educated clergy, who preached against superstition, admitted that the night was a testing ground for faith. Evil, they said, was strongest when light was weakest. And yet, despite their fears, people loved the night. It was the only time when labor stopped, when fields rested and hands grew still. For a farmer, sleep was a gift earned by the sweat of the day. After a hard day of plowing or reaping, the weight of exhaustion was so great that even fear could not keep one awake. The deep, steady breathing of the family became the rhythm of peace. Children clung to their mothers in sleep, finding comfort in the familiar warmth of the shared bed. Occasionally, the peace was broken by the sound of someone rising between the first and second sleep. A man might quietly get up to tend to the fire, stirring the ashes to keep the coals alive till morning. A woman might nurse a baby, her figure glowing softly in the candlelight. Outside, a watchman patrolled the village walls, his footsteps echoing faintly through the dark. In the castle, guards kept their posts by torchlight, whispering stories to stay awake. In monasteries, bells tolled softly, calling monks to prayer. Across the continent, the world moved in unison between sleep and wakefulness, joined by the invisible rhythm of night. The medieval people's relationship with darkness was different from ours. Today, we chase it away with lamps, screens, and neon lights, but they embraced it as part of the divine order. Darkness was the domain of mystery, reflection, and dreams. Even physicians of the time wrote about the healing power of proper night rest. They believed the soul traveled during sleep, wandering through realms unseen, and that deep rest kept the body in balance with the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. To sleep poorly was to disturb one's nature. To sleep soundly was to be in harmony with God's creation. People also believed in noises of the soul, the murmurs, sighs, and words spoken in sleep. Talking in one's dreams was not uncommon, and it was often considered meaningful. If a person muttered the name of someone while sleeping, it could be interpreted as affection, guilt, or even witchcraft. Wives sometimes accused their husbands of hidden sins based on words spoken in dreams. Priests, too, paid attention to such things. They saw the sleeping mind as a window into one's spiritual condition. And there were, of course, the physical sounds of sleep itself. Snoring was accepted as normal, even healthy. Loud snoring was described in literature as a sign of a hearty man, though it might earn playful complaints from his wife. Sleepwalking was viewed with fear. Those who wandered at night were thought to be touched by unseen forces. Some believed their souls had left their bodies temporarily, and if they were woken too suddenly, the soul might not return. Parents would guide sleepwalkers gently back to bed without waking them, whispering protective prayers all the while. Beyond homes and villages, the open night carried its own music. In the countryside, crickets chirped endlessly, frogs croaked by the rivers, and sometimes distant church bells marked the passing hours. These bells, called canonical hours, reminded monks and villagers alike that even in darkness, time belonged to God. Travelers moving between towns often navigated by the sound of these bells, which carried farther than sight in the black of night. If one could stand outside a medieval village at midnight, the soundscape would be hauntingly beautiful. Faint human voices, distant animal cries, a slow rustle of wind through trees, and perhaps the muffled sound of a blacksmith's hammer far away, because even at night, some trades never slept. The air itself felt thicker, as though filled with memory and prayer. Every sound, no matter how small, had meaning. The night was alive, and the people who lived in it knew it well. As dawn approached, the world began to shift. The rooster crowed again, this time at the right hour. Dogs stretched and yawned. Fires were rekindled, and the chill of morning crept through the walls. The second sleep ended gently. People rose slowly, yawning, stretching, murmuring small morning prayers. The noises of the night faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of the waking day. Clattering pots, bleating goats, the shuffle of feet on dirt floors. To us, the medieval night might seem primitive or frightening, but to them it was sacred. It was a time of reflection, renewal, and quiet companionship. The sounds that filled it, the whispers, the snores, the wind, the bells, were not disturbances. They were lullabies of a world that accepted darkness as part of life, not as something to fear. In the strange harmony of their nights, perhaps the people of the Middle Ages slept more deeply, more peacefully than we ever will. When a medieval man or woman closed their eyes, they didn't simply fall into rest. Sleep wasn't just about the body recovering from hard labor. It was a spiritual passage, a moment when the soul left the flesh and drifted between worlds. In those dim candlelit centuries, people believed that dreams were whispers from heaven or murmurs from hell, and every dream carried a message that demanded attention. To sleep, for them, was to risk encountering something sacred or something terrifying. Imagine lying on a straw mattress under heavy woolen blankets, your day filled with toil, your belly only half full. You whisper a prayer before sleep, asking for protection from the spirits that roam in the night. The room is dark, the embers glow red, and slowly your breathing deepens. And then it begins the crossing. You find yourself walking through a meadow you've never seen before, or speaking to someone long dead, or standing before a blinding light that seems to understand you without words. To the medieval mind, this was not imagination, it was revelation. Dreams had power. They were not dismissed as random bursts of thought. Instead, they were studied, feared, interpreted, and sometimes even recorded by monks and scholars. The church taught that God could send messages to the faithful through dreams, just as he did to Joseph in the Bible. But the same church also warned that the devil could use dreams to deceive. This created a strange tension. Every dream might contain truth, but only the wise or the holy could tell which kind. Monks would write down their dreams and discuss them during morning reflections. A dream of clear water meant purity of soul. A dream of falling suggested sin or temptation. To dream of fire could be divine inspiration or demonic attack. Scholars like Macrobius and Isidore of Seville classified dreams into types: somnium, symbolic dreams; visio, prophetic dreams; oraculum, messages from divine beings; and insomnium, ordinary dreams caused by daily troubles. These categories guided priests in helping the faithful understand what their nights revealed about their hearts. Among ordinary villagers, dreams had a more practical magic. A peasant might dream of a field and take it as a sign of a coming harvest. A young woman who dreamed of a bird might tell her mother that it was a sign she'd soon marry. A dream of death wasn't always feared. It could mean rebirth, change, or protection from harm. Some even placed herbs like lavender or rosemary under their pillows to invite good dreams and keep away nightmares. Dreams were woven into life, as natural as eating or praying. But there was a darker side to this world of sleep, a side that crept in when candles burned low and hearts filled with fear. People believed that demons could visit sleepers, pressing down on their chests, stealing their breath. They called this creature the mare, from which our word nightmare was born. In art and tales, it was said to appear as a dark, heavy spirit, sitting atop a sleeper's chest while they lay frozen, unable to move or cry out. Today, we call it sleep paralysis. But to a medieval sleeper, it was nothing less than a demonic assault. To guard against such terrors, people performed small rituals before bed. They made the sign of the cross, whispered psalms, or sprinkled holy water near the doorway. In some villages, iron nails were driven into bed frames to repel evil. A Bible placed under the pillow or a blessed charm tied around the wrist offered protection. Some even believed that sleeping with one's head toward the east direction of Jerusalem would keep spirits away. Yet, despite all precautions, tales spread of those who woke, gasping, claiming they had seen the devil in the dark. Not all nocturnal visitors were demonic. Saints were said to appear in dreams, offering comfort, healing, or guidance. A farmer might dream of Saint Nicholas blessing his fields, or a widow might see the Virgin Mary promising peace to her departed husband. These visions brought hope, and sometimes entire pilgrimages were inspired by a single dream. In the year 1098, during the First Crusade, soldiers claimed they saw St. George leading them into battle in their sleep hand. When they woke, they believed victory was certain. Dreams, therefore, could alter destiny. For the wealthy, dreams were discussed like art. Noblemen kept dream diaries, consulting astrologers or priests to interpret them. The stars, they believed, influenced dreams as much as they influenced crops or wars. If a dream occurred under a full moon, it carried more weight than one under a crescent. Kings often had their dreams analyzed before making great decisions. It was said that King Henry I once postponed a journey after dreaming of falling from a bridge, a dream that may have saved his life for the poor. The meaning of dreams was shared orally around hearths and fires. Old women, seen as wise or witch-like, were often sought for their interpretations. They might say, if you dream of teeth falling out, someone near you will die, or if you dream of fish, good fortune will swim your way. These folk beliefs blended pagan traditions with Christian ones, forming a complex tapestry of spiritual and cultural meaning. But not every dream was welcomed. Some were so terrifying that people refused to sleep afterward. The medieval world called these incubus dreams, where an evil spirit visited in human form, often described as a shadowy man or woman who lay upon the sleeper, whispering temptations. These dreams were associated with lust and sin, and priests urged confession if such visions occurred. In monasteries, monks fasted and prayed to purge such thoughts, believing they came from the devil, testing their purity. Interestingly, some medieval physicians had their own explanations. They believed nightmares were caused by bad vapors rising from the stomach to the brain during digestion. Heavy meals, especially of meat or cheese, were said to disturb the humors and create evil dreams. To avoid such disturbances, doctors advised light suppers, warm wine, and gentle music before bed. Some even recommended sleeping with one's feet slightly elevated to aid digestion. Proof that medieval people mixed science and superstition in equal measure. But even the most learned minds could not escape the power of dreams. The philosopher Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest theologians of the age, wrote that dreams could come from three sources: divine inspiration, natural causes, or demonic deception. Yet even he admitted that only God could truly know which was which. Thus, every dream remained a mystery, a riddle between the soul and the divine. Sometimes dreams were shared, and that sharing gave them power. A mother might wake from a strange dream and rush to wake her son, warning him not to travel that day. A shepherd might tell his neighbors that he dreamed of wolves and convince them to guard their flocks more closely. A monk might write down a dream of fire and fear that it foretold a coming plague. In a world without science or weather forecasts, dreams filled the gaps in human understanding. They were the whispers of fate. And yet, for all their fear and wonder, dreams also comforted people. They allowed the living to meet the dead, again to see a lost father, to hear a child's laugh once more, to speak with a friend gone to war. Many believed the dead could visit through dreams, not to haunt, but to reassure. In this way, dreams were a bridge between worlds, a fragile thread connecting hearts across the veil of death. The medieval sleeper drifted through all of this, each night between heaven and hell, memory and prophecy, light and shadow. And when morning came, the dream world faded like mist, leaving behind only fragments, a color, a sound, a phrase that lingered in the mind. Some woke relieved, others haunted, but all believed their dreams meant something. To them, the night was alive with messages, and every dream was a doorway, one that could open to salvation, or to something far more mysterious. In the medieval imagination, the night was not only a time of rest, but also a time when the soul could roam, freely visiting faraway lands, encountering the dead, or standing before the divine. To close one's eyes was to surrender the physical body, but not the spirit. It was believed that while the flesh lay still, the soul wandered. This wandering was both wondrous and dangerous, For who could guarantee that the soul would return unscathed? To sleep was to trust that God's protection extended into the unseen realm, where light and darkness endlessly contended for human souls. As the fire dimmed and the last whisper of prayer faded, the medieval sleeper entered what we now call REM sleep, but to them it was something far more mysterious. They called it Spiritus Peregrinatio, the pilgrimage of the soul. It was a journey beyond flesh and bone, guided by unseen forces. There were stories of monks who saw heaven in their sleep, of peasants who spoke with the dead, and of sinners who awoke screaming after glimpsing the fires of hell. Dreams, visions, and out-of-body experiences blurred together until no one could truly separate the spiritual from the physical. In some monastic texts, sleep was described as a miniature death. When one slept, the soul left through the mouth or nose, connected to the body only by a thin, invisible thread. If that thread broke before dawn, death would follow. People were warned not to wake a sleeper too abruptly. Doing so might snap the thread and trap the soul outside. Mothers watched over their children carefully, fearful that a sudden shake might steal a breath or a life. The idea was ancient, inherited from Greek and Roman philosophy. But in medieval Europe, it became woven into Christian theology. The sleep of the body and the wandering of the soul mirrored the eternal sleep of death and the promise of resurrection. Those who dreamed of flying believed their souls had truly risen. They described sensations of floating above their beds, seeing the earth below them like a painted map. Some claimed to visit holy places such as Jerusalem or Rome in their sleep. Pilgrims who could not afford long journeys found comfort in the belief that their souls might travel there instead. A vision of a shining city, a cathedral filled with angels, or a cross blazing in the sky was taken as a spiritual pilgrimage, a sign that God had accepted their faith, even if their feet never touched the Holy Land. But not every wandering soul traveled to sacred places. There were darker stories whispered by firesides and in monastery cloisters, stories of souls who wandered too far. Some people claimed they saw their neighbors walking through the night like shadows, even though those same people were asleep in bed. These ghostly doubles were called fetches or wraiths, signs that the person might soon die. Others claimed that witches sent their spirits forth to join demonic gatherings under the moonlight. The church condemned such beliefs as heresy, but common folk clung to them. To dream of flying at night or dancing in strange company could be interpreted as evidence of witchcraft, and some were even executed for admitting to such dreams under torture despite fear. The fascination with the soul's travels persisted. One famous story from the 12th century tells of a monk named Alberic of Monte Cassino who fell into a deep sleep for 9 days. When he awoke, he claimed his soul had been taken by angels to see the realms of heaven and hell. His descriptions were vivid golden cities, crystal rivers, and pits of endless fire. His vision spread across Europe, copied by monks, and read in churches as a warning to sinners. It became one of the inspirations for later works like Dante's Divine Comedy, showing how dreams and faith merged to shape even great literature. Among peasants, such experiences were less grand, but no less profound. A farmer might wake before dawn, trembling, and say he had seen his dead wife standing in the doorway, silent and sad. To him, it was no dream but a visitation. People would light candles for the departed and pray for their peace. Sometimes they placed bread and milk on windowsills, believing that wandering souls might find nourishment and leave the living unharmed. The line between dream, ghost, and vision was thin as the smoke from their hearths. Physicians, meanwhile, tried to explain these wanderings using the science of the humors. They believed that sleep caused the vital spirits to retreat inward, cooling the body and freeing the imagination. Too much black bile could make dreams dark and melancholic, while too much blood produced joyous visions. If the stomach was overfull, vapors rose to the brain, clouding thought and creating wild illusions. Remedies were offered: light suppers, lavender pillows, and cups of warm wine mixed with herbs. In a time before psychology, this was their way of balancing the physical and the spiritual. Night terrors, which we now understand as disorders of sleep, were viewed with holy dread. A person who thrashed or screamed in their sleep was thought to be fighting demons. Family members would sprinkle holy water on the sleeper or touch them with a crucifix until they calmed. If nightmares persisted, a priest might bless the bed or perform a small exorcism. Even the most rational minds believed that evil could slip into dreams, using them as doorways into the soul. Monks wrote of the dark hour of the night, around midnight to 3 in the morning, when temptation and visions were strongest. It was said that the devil preferred those hours because the mind was weakest and faith drowsy. The strictest monasteries scheduled prayers during these hours, not only to honor God, but to keep the mind guarded. In cold, echoing chapels, the sound of chanting filled the night. An invisible battle between light and darkness fought in whispers and song. For ordinary people, dreams could also reveal the future. A baker might dream of a collapsing oven and wake fearing fire. A sailor might dream of calm seas and take it as a promise of safe travel. Dream books circulated among literate classes, offering guides to interpretation. To dream of gold signifies deceit. To dream of bread is a sign of plenty. To dream of water means tears, though condemned by the church. These manuals sold well, showing that even faith could not quiet curiosity about the mysteries of the night. Sometimes entire communities were shaped by a single dream. In 1230, a shepherd in Spain claimed that the Virgin Mary appeared to him in his sleep, telling him to dig at a certain spot. There he found an old statue of the Virgin hidden during Moorish invasions. A chapel was built on that spot, and pilgrims came from far and wide. Whether real or imagined, the dream changed lives, turning faith into stone and wood. Such stories spread through Europe like wildfire, fueling belief in divine messages. But perhaps the most haunting part of medieval sleep was the fear that one might not wake at all. Death often came quietly in the night, by fever, by childbirth, or by hunger. To fall asleep was to risk never opening one's eyes again. This fear made every night a small surrender, and every morning a miracle. People thanked God upon waking, whispering, "Thou hast kept me through the darkness." Life itself was measured in the rhythm of sleeping and waking, the fragile dance of the soul's return. Even the act of dreaming could be a comfort in such a harsh world. For a few hours, a poor man could live in a castle. A grieving woman could see her lost child smile, and a weary monk could hear angels sing. The body might rest on straw and wood, but the soul soared among stars. In the stillness of the medieval night, surrounded by silence and superstition, sleep was the only escape from hunger, toil, and fear, a nightly miracle that made the world bearable. As dawn crept through the shutters, dreams dissolved like smoke. The soul returned quietly to its vessel, the thread intact. The sleeper stirred, rubbed his eyes, and rose to face another day of labor or prayer. The visions of the night faded, but their meaning lingered, a warning, a promise, or a blessing. To the medieval mind, sleep was not just rest, it was a rehearsal for death and a glimpse of eternity. When we think of medieval sleep, we often imagine silence, darkness, and rest, but for many in those times, sleep was the hour of revelation. To the people of the Middle Ages, the night was not just an absence of daylight. It was a sacred veil, a threshold between the mortal world and the divine. Behind that veil, the soul could receive messages from heaven, warnings from hell, or mysteries that no priest could fully explain. In this part of the night, when the world was hushed and the body lay still, God was said to whisper to the faithful, and dreams became sermons, written not on parchment, but on the mind itself. Holy dreams were taken very seriously. When a person claimed to have dreamed of an angel or saint, the community listened. In monasteries and convents, dream reports were carefully recorded, not as curiosities, but as spiritual experiences. These records, called visions or revelations, filled entire manuscripts. Monks described their dreams in precise detail, the colors, the words spoken, even the smells. Each dream was analyzed for signs of divine presence. If a figure glowed with light, if it was shadowed or silent, it might be demonic. Sometimes, what began as a dream was believed to grow into prophecy, shaping not only a single life, but the faith of entire communities. One of the most famous examples comes from a 12th century abbess named Hildegard of Bingen. From childhood, she experienced vivid visions during sleep, great, luminous scenes of creation, angels, and the cosmic order of the universe. She described them as living lights that spoke to her without words. Though she feared these experiences at first, her confessor urged her to record them, and her writings became some of the most important theological works of her age. Hildegard's dreams were not dismissed as madness. They were accepted as divine revelation, proof that God still spoke through chosen souls. Her visions shaped medieval understanding of medicine, music, and mysticism, and she remains one of the great dreamers of history. But Hildegard was not alone. There were countless stories of holy dreams that changed the course of lives and nations. A simple peasant in France once dreamed that Saint Michael the Archangel commanded him to build a chapel on a rocky island by the sea. That vision led to the creation of Mont Saint-Michel, one of the most breathtaking religious sites in the world. The dream of one poor man became a monument of stone and faith. In another tale, a soldier in the Crusades dreamed of a shining cross in the sky the night before battle. He took it as a sign of victory and led his men to triumph. Such stories spread quickly, told from pulpit to marketplace, blending faith, folklore, and awe. These visions were not confined to the saints or noblemen. The poor, too, found meaning in their dreams. A mother who lost her child might dream of the Virgin Mary holding the baby in her arms, and she would wake comforted, believing her child was safe in heaven. A farmer might dream of Saint Isidore plowing a field beside him, and he would believe his harvest would be blessed. Dreams were a language that all could understand, regardless of wealth or education. They gave meaning to suffering and offered hope in a world where life was short and harsh. Yet the church walked a fine line. For every holy dream, there were a dozen false ones. Priests warned that the devil was cunning and could disguise himself as an angel of light. A dream that flattered pride or tempted desire was to be mistrusted. Confessors advised their flock to pray for discernment, to ask whether a vision led to humility or to vanity. Even saints were not exempt from doubt. Saint Francis of Assisi, it was said, once dreamed that God told him to rebuild his church. Francis took the words literally and began repairing an old chapel with his hands, only to later realize the dream had meant a spiritual renewal of faith. His mistake became a lesson. Divine dreams required divine interpretation. Dreams also played a role in the making of kings. Medieval rulers often used dreams as signs of legitimacy or divine favor. Chronicles tell of kings who dreamed of crowns descending from heaven or of serpents defeated by golden lions. These dreams were written into royal histories, giving their reigns an air of divine approval. Even battles were sometimes fought because of dreams. A sign seen by one leader could be enough to start a war or forge a peace. To medieval minds, dreams were not mere imagination. They were politics, prophecy, and proof of God's hand in human affairs. But not all dreams brought comfort. Some brought fear, visions of punishment, apocalypse, and death. During times of plague and famine, people dreamed of fire raining from the sky or of cities drowned in blood. Chroniclers wrote that before the Black Death, many reported seeing grim figures in their sleep, hooded, faceless beings holding scythes or torches. Whether these were true dreams or tales told after the fact, they reflected the deep anxiety of a world where death was never far away. In such times, even nightmares could be seen as divine warnings, urging repentance before disaster struck. One of the most fascinating beliefs was that dreams could be shared across distances. Friends or lovers, separated by war, sometimes claimed to have dreamed of one another on the same night. Mothers said they knew their sons had died in battle because they dreamed of them calling out from the darkness. These experiences reinforced the medieval sense that dreams were real connections between souls, not illusions. The body might be bound by space, but the soul, in sleep, could travel anywhere, even beyond death. The connection between dreams and divine revelation also found its way into art and literature. Gothic churches were filled with images of sleeping prophets and dreaming saints. Stained glass windows depicted Joseph dreaming of angels, Daniel interpreting the dreams of kings, and Mary receiving heavenly messages in visions. Even poets took inspiration from this nocturnal world. The famous English work, The Dream of the Rood, presents a dream in which the cross of Christ speaks to the sleeper, recounting its suffering and glory. In Chaucer's Book of the Duchess, a grieving man meets a ghostly lady in a dream and learns to accept loss. These stories reflected the medieval belief that dreams were the bridges through which truth could cross into mortal understanding. In monasteries, dreams were carefully monitored. If a monk claimed to have seen Christ or an angel, his superior would test him, questioning his fasting, his obedience, and his humility. True visions were believed to bring peace and clarity, while false ones left confusion or pride. The monk who passed the test might be considered blessed, even saintly. The one who failed risked punishment for vanity or deceit. This process shows how seriously dreams were taken and how dangerous they could be for the unguarded soul. Physicians, too, began studying holy dreams in their own way. They argued that certain temperaments were more likely to receive visions, particularly those who were melancholic, quiet, and prone to fasting. These were the people whose spirits were lighter and more open to divine influence. To modern minds, it might sound like psychology. To them, it was theology in practice. Fasting, prayer, and solitude were not just pious acts, they purified the mind, making it a clearer mirror for God's reflection during sleep. As centuries passed, the meaning of dreams began to shift. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus wrote about dreams not just as divine messages, but as natural processes, manifestations of thought, emotion, and the movement of bodily humors. Still, even these great minds could not separate science from faith. Aquinas taught that God could speak through nature itself, and thus dreams could be both natural and divine. The medieval sleeper lay at the crossroads of heaven and earth, where reason and mystery intertwined. And when the night finally ended, when roosters crowed and the first light touched the horizon, those who had dreamed felt both wonder and relief. They rose slowly, crossing themselves, and whispered thanks for another safe return from the realm of shadows. Some went to confess what they had seen. Others kept it secret, fearing ridicule or disbelief. But all carried their dreams into the waking day like fragile treasures. They believed that in the stillness of the night, they had brushed against eternity. For us, their dreams may seem like superstition, but to them, they were as real as breath. They offered purpose in a world of hardship, meaning in a life shadowed by death. Through dreams, they spoke to saints and angels, faced demons and desires, and caught glimpses of the divine mystery that ruled their lives. When sleep came to a medieval soul, it was never merely rest, it was an encounter, a revelation, a journey through the infinite darkness where even the smallest dream could carry the voice of God. The medieval world was a place where medicine met magic, and sleep was not merely rest, it was a battlefield between the body, the spirit, and unseen forces that roamed in the dark. When the sun vanished and candles flickered low, the people of the Middle Ages believed that sleep opened a doorway not only to dreams, but to danger. Evil spirits, witches, and disease were said to creep into the minds of sleepers. To guard themselves, people turned to what they trusted most: rituals, herbs, prayers, and charms that blended faith and superstition into a nightly ceremony in those dim cottages and stone chambers. The act of preparing for sleep was almost sacred. A peasant woman might sprinkle holy water on her bed before lying down, whispering a prayer to Saint Raphael, the archangel of healing. A monk, before retiring to his narrow wooden cot, might recite the Psalms in Latin, believing each verse could seal his soul from nightmares. Even noblemen and queens, with feathered mattresses and fur blankets, were not without fear. The line between sickness and sorcery was so thin that no one, however wealthy, dared go to bed without some charm or blessing at hand. Among the most common sleep aids of the medieval era were herbs, a living pharmacy that grew in cottage gardens and monastery courtyards. Lavender was treasured not only for its fragrance, but for its power to drive away melancholy and bad spirits. Bundles of lavender were hung near beds or stuffed into pillows to calm troubled minds. Valerian root, often boiled into tea or soaked in wine, was believed to quiet the choler, the fiery humor that caused restlessness and nightmares. Chamomile, mint, and wild thyme were used to soften the senses and promote gentle dreams. But medieval people didn't stop at drinking herbs. They believed in their spiritual presence, too. A healer might tell someone who suffered from night terrors to place a sprig of rosemary under their pillow or to wear a garland of marjoram around their head before sleeping. These were not just rustic remedies. They were thought to ward off demons. In monastic texts, certain herbs were even associated with specific saints. St. John's wort, for instance, was named after John the Baptist and thought to repel evil spirits and witches. It was called fuga demonum, the flight of demons. For those tormented by chronic sleeplessness, medieval healers prescribed more peculiar treatments. Some physicians recommended writing verses from the Bible on parchment, then soaking the paper in rosewater before placing it under the pillow. Others suggested more unsettling methods, drinking a potion made from crushed poppy seeds and goat's milk, or rubbing goose fat mixed with honey on the soles of the feet before bed. If one's sleep was disturbed by spirits or visions, they were told to hang a wolf's tooth by their bedside, a symbol of courage and protection. In many parts of Europe, especially rural England and Germany, sleep charms were passed down like family heirlooms. These were small amulets containing bits of herbs, wax, feathers, or handwritten prayers. Mothers tied them around the necks of children to protect them from the mare, a supernatural being believed to sit on sleepers' chests and steal their breath. The term nightmare comes from this very belief, a blend of folklore and fear that turned restless nights into haunting legends. Monks and scholars, on the other hand, approached sleep through the lens of divine order. The great medical texts of the era, written by scholars like Hildegard of Bingen and Avicenna, treated sleep as both a physical and spiritual necessity. They believed sleep balanced the bodies for humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much heat in the body could lead to restless dreams. Too much cold could cause heaviness and gloom. To fix this, they recommended adjusting diet and sleeping position. One should not, they said, sleep immediately after eating. It was thought to cause evil vapors to rise from the stomach to the brain. The ideal position, according to medieval doctors, was lying on the right side first, then turning to the left later in the night, mirroring the natural movement of digestion and the cosmic order of the stars. Even kings sought the wisdom of these midnight healers. In royal courts, physicians often blended science and sorcery to craft sleep potions for nobles plagued by worry or guilt. Some formulas mixed opium, honey, and wine, while others relied on strange ingredients like powdered pearls or distilled moonlight, a poetic name for dew collected at midnight. These were costly remedies reserved for the powerful, yet often no more effective than a peasant's lavender sachet in villages. Sleep was still a communal experience. Families often slept in the same room, sometimes on the same bed, for warmth and safety. The sounds of breathing, crackling fire, and wind outside formed a lullaby of their own. Yet even in such closeness, people feared the vulnerability of sleep. They would whisper protective phrases before closing their eyes. "Jesu, keep me. Saint Michael, guard my bed, or let no shade cross my soul." Such words were more than habit. They were shields against the unknown. There were also those who specialized in curing sleeplessness through ritual alone. Wise women, herbalists, and so-called cunning folk were often called at midnight to bless a restless sleeper. A common method was to circle the bed 3 times while reciting a charm, then sprinkle salt on each corner, a practice meant to purify the space. If a person claimed to be attacked by a night hag, the healer would place an iron key or a pair of scissors under the pillow, believing metal could repel malevolent spirits. Iron, they said, was born from thunder, the weapon of God himself. But not all cures were gentle. In the darker corners of medieval medicine, more extreme treatments existed. Some doctors believed that sleeplessness came from demonic possession of the blood, and thus prescribed bloodletting at certain hours of the moon. Others advised rubbing owl brains mixed with vinegar onto the temples, or drinking wine steeped with crushed emeralds. These gruesome concoctions, though shocking today, reflected the desperation of people seeking peace in a world where night was never truly safe. Still, within this mixture of superstition and science, there was something profoundly human. The medieval person understood, perhaps better than we do, that sleep was mysterious, that it could heal or harm, enlighten or terrify. They didn't try to conquer the night. They tried to live with it. Every charm, herb, and whispered prayer was a humble attempt to make peace with darkness. So when a medieval villager lay down after a long day, clutching a sprig of lavender or murmuring the Lord's Prayer, they were not just seeking rest. They were asking the universe for mercy. To sleep in that age was to surrender, not to a biological process, but to faith. And in that surrender, maybe they found something we have long forgotten, a trust that even in the silence of the night, they were not alone. As the moon drifted above the turrets of castles and the humble thatched roofs of villages, a strange kind of healer moved through the medieval world, not the kind who carried scalpels or bandages, but those who claimed to heal through dreams, faith, and divine touch. These were the night doctors, cunning healers, and holy dreamers who walked the blurred line between religion and witchcraft. To the people of the Middle Ages, sleep was not a simple act of rest. It was a spiritual battlefield, and those who could control or interpret the night's mysteries held real power. The medieval church understood this all too well and feared it. Dreams were seen as messages, but from whom? Some, said the priests, were sent by God, carrying visions of saints or warnings of sin. Others, however, were whispered by demons. The church's writings often warned that Satan used dreams to corrupt the soul, disguising himself as angels or loved ones to lead the sleeper astray. To dream of flying, for example, might be taken as evidence of vanity. To dream of forbidden pleasure could mean demonic temptation. Even sleep, that most innocent of human needs, became a moral concern. Monks and theologians debated the nature of dreams intensely. Saint Augustine wrote that the devil entered the mind through sleep when faith was weakest. Saint Jerome cautioned monks against unholy dreams, which he believed came from gluttony and indulgence before bed. The church began teaching that proper sleep required not just a healthy body, but a pure soul. Every monastery, every cloister had rules about when and how one should sleep. The bell for Compline, the final prayer of the evening, marked the last words a monk might speak before surrendering to silence, and silence itself was sacred. For idle talk after Compline was thought to invite the devil into the mind. Yet outside the stone walls of monasteries, ordinary people continued to turn to dream interpreters. In villages across England, France, and Germany, women with knowledge of herbs and scripture offered their services as dream readers. They were neither doctors nor priests, but something in between, the keepers of ancient, half-pagan wisdom that had survived since pre-Christian times. If a farmer dreamt of his crops withering, or a wife dreamt of a dark bird circling her home, these dream readers would translate the message. Sometimes they prescribed remedies, placing a bowl of salt water beneath the bed to absorb evil, or sleeping with a Bible open to the Book of Psalms. But the church saw danger in this. To rely on dreams was to bypass God's appointed intermediaries, the priests. The Council of Trent and earlier local councils denounced dream interpretation as heresy. In sermons and pamphlets, priests warned that those who seek answers in sleep were dancing with devils. Yet even their warnings couldn't erase the people's faith in these nightly visions. Dreams were too personal, too vivid. They touched the soul in a way no sermon could. Meanwhile, medieval medicine was evolving in its own peculiar way. Learned doctors, trained in the universities of Paris, Bologna, or Salerno, began to classify dreams not as supernatural signs, but as reflections of bodily imbalance. They believed that the contents of one's dreams were influenced by the state of the body's humors. A dream of fire or violence indicated excess choler, yellow bile. A dream of water suggested too much phlegm, while a dream of flight pointed to an overactive imagination caused by disturbed vapors rising to the brain. In their view, the body and soul were mirrors of each other, and sleep revealed both. Still, in practice, medicine and mysticism remained inseparable. The night doctors who traveled from town to town offered cures that were half prayer, half potion. They carried small satchels filled with holy relics, dried herbs, and handwritten charms. A sleepless man might be told to sleep with a consecrated candle at his bedside. A woman plagued by nightmares could be given a potion of poppy and milk, blessed with the sign of the cross. These healers claimed that their cures worked not through the herbs alone, but through divine intention, that each ingredient held both a physical and spiritual essence. In rural England, one such healer was known as Old Mother Agnes, a real figure mentioned in local chronicles from the 14th century. She was said to treat those who could not find rest by whispering Latin prayers over their heads, while brushing them with a broom made of nettles and willow. She claimed this swept away the weight of dreams. The church accused her of witchcraft, but villagers defended her, saying she brought peace to the sleepless. Similar figures existed across Europe: the wise women of Ireland, the Benedante night travelers of Italy, and the Hexen of Germany. To the common folk, they were not witches, but guardians of the night. However, as the centuries passed, the church grew harsher. By the late Middle Ages, especially during the height of witch trials in the 15th and 16th centuries, many healers were accused of consorting with demons simply because they claimed to influence dreams or offer sleep potions. The act of gathering herbs under the moonlight, once a respected craft, became evidence of heresy. A woman carrying lavender and rosemary could be seen as a witch in disguise. Even certain herbs were condemned. Mandrake root, for example, was believed to scream when pulled from the ground, and anyone using it for sleep was said to risk their soul. Ironically, the same church that condemned dream healers also relied on dreams in its own stories. Saints were said to receive divine visions in their sleep. Saint Benedict's followers reported that he saw the entire world gathered in a single beam of light while sleeping. Pilgrims visiting relics of saints often fell into holy sleep, waking with miraculous cures. These contradictions defined the medieval mind, faith and fear, holiness and heresy, all intertwined in the dim glow of candlelight for those who dared to keep their old traditions. The night was a sacred time. Families gathered before bed to say protective prayers. Some recited verses backward, believing it would confuse evil spirits. Others traced crosses on their pillows, using holy oil or chalk. In some homes, especially in Northern Europe, small wooden carvings of angels or saints were placed near the bed. People believed these figures watched while they slept, standing guard between their dreams and the dark. And yet, despite all these efforts, nightmares persisted, and when they did, they were taken seriously. To dream of falling, drowning, or being chased was not dismissed as imagination. It was treated as a warning. People might fast the next day, confess their sins, or give alms to the poor in hopes of cleansing their spirit. Some even built small altars in their homes, dedicating them to Saint Michael or Saint George, who were thought to battle demons in the dream realm. The medieval world lived in the shadow of faith, but also in the quiet of fear. Sleep, that daily surrender, was seen as both a gift and a risk, a time when one's soul left the body, drifting through unseen realms. To wake was a small resurrection. To sleep was a rehearsal for death. That is why prayers before bed always ended with the same wish: if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Those words, still whispered by children today, are the echo of a medieval night, a world where even rest required divine protection. And so, the night doctors continued their secret work, tending to the sleepless with whispered prayers and fragrant herbs, while the church thundered from its pulpit. Yet between the bells of Compline and the rooster's crow, the ordinary people of the Middle Ages found their own truth, that in the darkness, between fear and faith, sleep itself was the greatest healer. In the late medieval night, when the hearth embers dimmed and the village lay wrapped in silence, people believed the world between wakefulness and slumber was thin, fragile as a candle flame flickering in the dark. Sleep was not a safe retreat. It was a journey, and sometimes that journey went wrong. To dream was to wander. To wander too far was to risk never coming back. For the people of the Middle Ages, the darkness that came with sleep was more than just the absence of light. It was the realm of spirits, demons, and unexplainable visitations that both fascinated and terrified them. The medieval mind did not separate the physical from the spiritual. Every ailment, Every dream, every sleepless night had meaning. If someone thrashed in their sleep, it wasn't restlessness, it was possession. If a woman woke screaming in the night, she wasn't simply frightened, she had been attacked by a night demon. One of the most feared of these entities was the incubus, a demonic male spirit said to visit women in their sleep, lying upon them to steal their breath or corrupt their souls. Its female counterpart, the succubus, preyed upon men, appearing in the shape of a beautiful woman only to drain their life force by morning. These dark legends had deep roots. Ancient pagan myths had long described spirits who sat on sleepers' chests, suffocating them. The Norse called it the Mara, from which the English word nightmare was born. In Slavic lands, it was known as Zamora, a spirit that crept into homes through keyholes or cracks in the wall. Even in Christian Europe, these beliefs persisted, reshaped by theology and fear. Church scholars explained that these dream demons were real, fallen angels sent to tempt the faithful. Their attacks were a punishment for unconfessed sin or for those who fell asleep without prayer to defend themselves. Medieval people created elaborate rituals. They would place iron scissors under their pillows open in the shape of a cross to keep demons at bay. Some tied ribbons, blessed by priests, around their wrists or necks. Others drew protective signs on their bedposts using chalk consecrated on Easter. Mothers whispered ancient rhymes over their children, not found in any Bible, but believed to ward off evil. Sleep soft, sleep sound, no devil come round. In every village across Europe, the fear of the night's invisible visitors shaped the way people slept. Even learned physicians, steeped in the science of Galen and Aristotle, recognized that dreams held power. They wrote treatises explaining that demons did not literally enter the body, rather, corrupted vapors from the stomach or the imagination gave rise to phantoms. Yet even these doctors acknowledged the spiritual. The boundaries between medicine, religion, and magic were porous. A physician might prescribe valerian or poppy to calm the nerves, and then recommend reciting a psalm before bed to cleanse the soul's air. In the monasteries, the relationship between sleep and sin was a constant concern. Monks were expected to regulate their rest carefully. Too much sleep, they believed, invited sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. Too little, however, made the mind vulnerable to temptation. Monks slept in communal dormitories, often with candles burning low, both for light and protection. Some even slept in their robes to resist the temptation of comfort. Before lying down, they chanted, "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." This wasn't poetry, it was protection. But even the holy were not spared the trials of the night. Chronicles tell of monks waking in terror, claiming to have seen devils at their bedsides. In the Vita Petrum, the lives of the Desert Fathers, early Christian hermits, describe nights of struggle where demons whispered blasphemies into their dreams. Saint Anthony himself was said to have battled a host of demonic apparitions in his sleep, his body left bruised and broken by dawn. To the medieval believer, these stories were not metaphors. They were proof that sleep could be a spiritual battlefield in the homes of common folk. This fear translated into nightly vigilance. Families slept close together, both for warmth and protection. A small cross was hung above the bed, and candles, blessed on Candlemas Day, were kept nearby to light during storms or nightmares. If someone woke from a frightful dream, they might spit 3 times, an old pagan practice said to banish evil spirits, then recite a prayer. Dream interpretation manuals circulated secretly among those who could read, filled with symbols and their meanings. Dreaming of bread meant prosperity, of falling teeth, loss or death. Dreaming of fire meant anger, of water meant purity or cleansing. But not all dreams were feared. Some were revered. There were countless tales of saints appearing to the faithful in dreams, offering guidance, healing, or prophecy. In 12th century France, a peasant named Robert claimed that Saint Michael appeared to him in a dream, commanding him to build a chapel on a hill, which became the famous Mont Saint-Michel. Pilgrims traveled great distances to sleep near the relics of saints, believing that holy dreams would cure their ailments. This practice, known as incubation, dated back to ancient Greece, but was adapted into Christian custom. The faithful would sleep inside chapels or near sacred tombs, hoping their dreams would reveal divine healing. Still, there was always a shadow. Not all visions were divine. Some brought madness, or worse. A haunting story from a 14th century German chronicle tells of a blacksmith who dreamt of a hooded figure asking for a nail to be forged. The next day, the man found a nail missing from his shop, and that night he dreamt of the same figure hammering the nail into his own coffin. Within a week, the blacksmith died in his sleep. Such tales were whispered at firesides as warnings. Beware of what comes to you in dreams. For not all who visit the night are friends. To sleep in the Middle Ages was, in many ways, to surrender control. In waking life, one could pray, confess, and choose virtue. But in dreams, the soul wandered, exposed and defenseless. This fear birthed many customs that linger even today. The idea of saying prayers before bed, of crossing oneself before sleep, of covering mirrors at night to keep spirits from entering through reflections, all stem from those medieval anxieties about what lay beyond the veil of rest. And yet, for all their fears, the medieval people found beauty in the night too. They saw sleep as a small death, a rehearsal for resurrection. The act of closing one's eyes was symbolic of faith, the trust that one would wake again, body and soul intact. Monks called it the rest of the righteous. Peasants called it the Lord's mercy. Perhaps that is why, even after nights of terror and dreams of demons, they still prayed with hope. Because in a world filled with darkness, hope was the only light that could last until morning, when dawn finally broke, when roosters crowed and mist lifted from the fields. The terrors of the night faded like smoke. Children ran outside, laughter returned, and the fears of midnight became whispers of old tales. But deep in their hearts, medieval people carried the memory of those unseen hours, a time when sleep was sacred, dangerous, and divine all at once. The medieval night was once thick and alive, a breathing thing made of superstition, silence, and slow-burning firelight. For centuries, darkness ruled half of every life. People went to bed with the sun and woke in fragments of slumber. First sleep, midnight, waking, second sleep. Their lives wrapped in rhythm and ritual. But something began to change in the later Middle Ages. A quiet revolution that would transform humanity's relationship with night forever. By the 15th and 16th centuries, the medieval world was beginning to vanish. replaced by the age of light, progress, and restless wakefulness. This is the story of how sleep itself, that ancient mystery, was reshaped by the dawn of modernity. It started with fire, but not the hearth fire that warmed peasant homes. No, it was the fire of invention, of glass, wax, and commerce. In towns like Venice, Paris, and London, streets that once turned black after sunset began to shimmer with the faint glow of lamps. Candles, once a rare luxury made from expensive beeswax, became more accessible. The new discovery of tallow candles made from animal fat filled the homes of merchants and artisans. Though they smoked and stank, they extended the day. The world began, quite literally, to stay awake longer. In the flicker of these new lights, humanity's sleep began to change. People stayed up to read, to work, to talk, to pray. Monks still kept their night vigils, but now so did scholars and merchants. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, spread books like wildfire, and with books came curiosity, imagination, and distraction. By candlelight, people read through hours that were once meant for dreams. For the first time, the night became productive. The rhythm of first and second sleep started to falter. Those peaceful midnights of prayer and reflection were slowly replaced by restless wakefulness. Minds lit not by faith, but by ink and flame. At the same time, the old world of superstition began to crack. Science, once bound by theology, began to ask questions the church could not silence. Physicians studied the body with new rigor. Sleep was no longer seen merely as a spiritual journey, but as a biological process, something measurable, controllable, and, perhaps, improvable. In 16th century medical manuals, doctors began advising patients to sleep 8 hours in one stretch rather than in broken parts. This advice, revolutionary at the time, came with the rise of humanist thinking, the belief that man could master himself and nature alike. The night no longer belonged to God or demons. It belonged to reason. But for the common people, the shift was slower, more intimate. Peasants still lived by the seasons. Farmers still rose with the roosters. Yet even in villages, the spread of candles and oil lamps began to stretch the boundaries of day. A farmer might now sit with his family after sunset, repairing tools or telling stories longer into the night. Sleep, once divided and ritualized, grew condensed, squeezed between labor and light. The communal silence that once ruled medieval nights was breaking. With this change came a new emotion, loneliness. In the medieval night, no one was truly alone. People slept side by side, children and elders, friends and strangers alike. The room's darkness was filled with breath, warmth, and murmured prayers. But as prosperity grew and homes expanded, people began sleeping in separate rooms. Privacy, once rare, became a symbol of wealth. The bedchamber transformed from a shared space into an intimate one. The act of sleep, once communal and sacred, became personal and private. And in that privacy, something ancient was lost: the comfort of collective dreaming. Meanwhile, the church's power over the night began to fade. The Reformation shattered old religious certainties. The authority of saints and relics weakened. People still prayed before bed, but now their prayers were simpler, stripped of the ornate rituals that had filled the medieval night. Sleep lost some of its mystery. No longer did people place charms under their pillows or sprinkle holy water on their beds, at least not as often. The night became less spiritual, less magical, and perhaps less forgiving. By the 17th century, cities glowed where darkness had once reigned. Oil lamps lit the streets of Amsterdam and Paris. The curfew bell, which once signaled the end of the day, grew meaningless. Inns stayed open late. Scholars debated under candlelight. Artists painted night scenes, not of fear, but of beauty. The philosopher Thomas Browne wrote in 1642 that sleep was a death of the body, but not of the mind. He described dreams as conversations with the divine. But Browne was already a man of two worlds, half medieval mystic, half modern rationalist, caught in the fading twilight of an age when sleep still felt sacred in this new world of light. Insomnia began to appear, a word barely known to medieval tongues. People who once slept easily began to lie awake, restless, troubled by thoughts. The new pace of life, the spread of trade, the noise of cities, all made it harder to surrender to rest. Sleep, once a friend, became something to chase. And though the new sciences promised mastery over nature, they could not conquer the simple mystery of sleep. Still, not all resisted the change. Some embraced the night's new possibilities. Artists painted by candlelight. Poets wrote verses at midnight. Lovers met in secret after curfew. The night, once feared, became romantic, a time of imagination, creativity, and freedom. The moon, once an omen of spirits, now symbolized beauty and thought. This was the dawn of modern sleep, not peaceful, not perfect, but profoundly human. Yet, if we listen closely, beneath the hum of our electric lights, the echoes of the medieval night still whisper. The body remembers the rhythm of two sleeps. The soul remembers the prayers before bed, the silence between waking and dreams. And though we live in an age that never truly sleeps, a part of us still yearns for that ancient darkness, for the quiet hum of a world that once knew how to rest. The medieval people, for all their fears and ignorance, had something we have lost: reverence for the night. They feared it, yes, but they also respected it. They saw sleep not as wasted time, but as a meeting with the divine, a nightly surrender of control. In our bright, restless world, that humility is rare. We have conquered the dark, but perhaps, in doing so, we've forgotten how to dream. As centuries turned and the world drifted from the medieval darkness into a half-lit dawn, something subtle and extraordinary happened. Humanity invented midnight. Not the astronomical midnight that always existed, but the idea of midnight. A line dividing the night, a marker between yesterday and tomorrow. In the medieval world, time was fluid, measured by prayer bells, candles, and the stars. But as clocks began to tick and the glow of civilization spread, people started to look at the night differently. They no longer drifted through it like dreamers. They began to count it, control it, live by it. And in doing so, they redefined what it meant to sleep, to wake, and to exist in darkness. In the early medieval centuries, time itself was a matter of faith. Monks governed their hours by divine rhythm, matins, lauds, prime, a sequence of prayers that divided day and night into holy fragments. Ordinary people, meanwhile, knew time only through nature. The cock's crow, the dimming of the sun, the toll of a distant bell. There were no personal clocks, no midnight feasts, no precise awareness of hours. When the sun fell, so did the world. But by the 14th century, mechanical clocks began appearing on church towers. With their iron gears and swinging weights, they transformed the flow of time from spiritual to mechanical. Now, the hours were visible, measurable, and loud, and when people could measure time, they began to fill it. This was the birth of the modern night, a time no longer surrendered to dreams, but divided into tasks, pleasures, and thoughts. Midnight became more than a passage through sleep. It became a moment in consciousness. Candles burned longer. Oil lamps were refilled, and city streets echoed with late footsteps. Merchants kept accounts under flickering light. Artists and philosophers, like Leonardo da Vinci, worked deep into the night, their minds restless, their quills scratching into silence. The medieval world had known night as a space of surrender. The modern world was beginning to see it as a space of creation. Yet this shift came with a cost. The darkness that had once united people, families huddled around a single hearth, whispering stories before bed, began to fragment. Now, sleep was postponed, stretched thinner. People lingered longer before resting. In towns and cities, the sound of bells ringing at midnight replaced the chirp of crickets. The stillness of the old world was broken by the rhythm of metal. Even peasants, though still bound to the daylight, felt the echo of this change. They were drawn into towns by trade and work, exposed to the strange new culture of the late hours. As the idea of midnight spread, so too did the fear of missing it. The church, once the guardian of night, had used darkness as a tool, a time for repentance, prayer, and penance. Midnight prayers, known as vigils or nocturnes, were believed to protect the soul from demons that wandered after dark. People believed that the veil between the living and the dead thinned at these hours. But with time's mechanical control, that spiritual fear turned into psychological anxiety. People began to lie awake, not in prayer, but in thought, thinking of debts, sins, dreams, and desires. The human mind, illuminated by candlelight, could not stop turning. Midnight became a time for worry, for regret, for restless wakefulness. The first cases of insomnia began appearing in medical texts of the 16th century. Doctors described it as a disturbance of the spirits, a condition of those whose minds worked too hard in the hours meant for rest. The scholar and the merchant, both once admired for their diligence, now found themselves cursed with sleeplessness. The very control humanity sought over time had begun to enslave it. In the dark silence of a half-lit room, people began to feel the passing of every moment and the weight of their own wakefulness. Midnight also became a cultural moment, a time of storytelling, of secrets, of superstition reborn. The old medieval fear of witches, ghosts, and demons did not disappear entirely. It evolved. In taverns and parlors, people whispered of the witching hour when spirits roamed and magic was strongest. But now these tales were told for entertainment rather than belief. The supernatural had moved from religion into folklore, from holy warning into cozy fear. The darkness that once terrified had become something to talk about, even to enjoy. The modern night, it seemed, could be both dangerous and delightful. Meanwhile, cities themselves began to dream. As oil lamps spread, their light spilled into windows, painting golden shapes on walls. Street vendors sold roasted nuts and wine to late-night wanderers. Musicians played in corners, their songs mingling with laughter. Midnight, once the hour of the dead, became the hour of the living lovers meeting in shadowed alleys, poets scribbling verses, printers turning presses. Humanity had taken the night and filled it with noise, light, and life. Time of silence had become a stage for the restless heart. But not everyone welcomed this awakening. Religious reformers condemned the growing habit of unholy hours, claiming that man's desire to stretch the night was a sign of pride, a rebellion against the natural order set by God. Philosophers worried about the effects of constant wakefulness. Sleep was still seen as necessary for both soul and body, but now it had to be earned. Those who stayed up too late, they said, would lose not only rest, but grace. In response, manuals on proper living began to appear, advising people on when to eat, pray, and sleep, and always warning against excess. Yet despite such caution, humanity could not resist the lure of midnight. It was too beautiful, too mysterious, too alive. In the art of the late Renaissance, this fascination shines. Painters began to explore the play of light and dark, a technique that captured the glowing candle amid shadow. Caravaggio, Rembrandt, Georges de la Tour, they painted faces lit by single flames, capturing that fragile boundary between waking and sleep. Their art reflected what society felt, awe and unease, toward the light that refused to die. The medieval darkness had once symbolized ignorance and sin. Now, light symbolized both knowledge and temptation. Humanity stood between the two, unable to rest in those dimly lit centuries. The night became something new, a mirror of the mind. Midnight no longer belonged to monks or spirits. It belonged to thinkers and dreamers, to those who could not stop wondering. Sleep, once a natural rhythm, became a choice, and with choice came guilt. People began to question whether sleeping too much was laziness or sleeping too little was virtue. The balance that had defined medieval life between prayer and rest, work and dream, was gone. The age of awakening had truly begun, and so, as the clocks ticked across Europe and lamps flickered in glass windows, the old world of silence faded. The night had been conquered, but the human heart had gained a new restlessness. Midnight was no longer a moment to pass through unconsciously. It was a living, breathing time, the heart of the new human experience. By the time the 18th century dawned, the last traces of the medieval night, the people who once feared the darkness now ruled it with light. Candles became cheaper, oil lamps brighter, and by the late 1700s, the first gaslights began to flicker in city streets. Night was no longer a curtain, it was a marketplace, a theater, a laboratory of human ambition. The great cities of London, Paris, and Amsterdam no longer slept. Humanity had conquered its ancient enemy, and in doing so, unknowingly created a new one, the sleepless self. The medieval man had seen night as a boundary between life and death, day and dream. He surrendered to it, trusting that sleep would restore him. But the modern man no longer surrendered. He resisted. Sleep, once divine, became an inconvenience. Merchants stayed up, counting profits. Writers and scientists chased ideas until dawn, and city guards patrolled the streets under glowing lamps. The world was transforming, and the night that had once whispered silence now buzzed with activity in those centuries. The phrase, burning the midnight oil, was born, not as a metaphor, but as a daily reality. The flicker of the oil lamp became a symbol of industry, of progress, of man's refusal to yield to nature. But beneath that proud glow, exhaustion crept quietly. Doctors began to notice new kinds of fatigue, not from laboring in the fields, but from the strain of the mind. The new world valued productivity above peace, and even sleep was expected to serve purpose. Where medieval peasants had rested as part of life's rhythm, the modern citizen began to measure rest as time lost. In the grand houses of Europe, the bedchamber itself changed. In medieval times, a bed was a shared space. Family members, servants, even guests might sleep side by side, wrapped in quilts and comfort. Now, privacy became fashion. The wealthy designed ornate bedrooms with drapes and locks, emphasizing solitude and status. The bed transformed into a throne of individuality, its curtains shutting out both noise and companionship. The communal warmth of medieval nights, the shared breath, the whispered prayers, the feeling of togetherness disappeared. And though luxury grew, loneliness deepened. The scientific revolution only widened this divide. Thinkers like René Descartes and Isaac Newton championed reason, calculation, and order, and the body, too, became something to be studied and disciplined. Physicians began to prescribe exact sleeping hours, warning against sloth and unproductive dreaming. Sleep was stripped of its mystery, reduced to a function of biology and time. Dreams, once sacred messages from the divine, became mere chemical echoes in the brain. Humanity had learned to explain the night, but in explaining it, they emptied it of wonder. Yet even as reason rose, nostalgia lingered. Poets mourned the passing of the true night, the wild, star-filled, fearful darkness that once shaped human imagination. In their verses, they tried to reclaim it. William Blake wrote of holy sleep and dreams of the soul, while Coleridge and Wordsworth wandered the midnight hills, seeking something ancient that had been lost. The Romantic poets, for all their love of progress, yearned for the quiet awe of medieval night, the sense that sleep connected man to something larger than himself. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution swept across the world like a storm of fire and steam. Factories roared through the night. The hum of machines replaced the croak of frogs and the sigh of the wind. The working class, trapped by the demands of endless production, began to lose even the luxury of rest. Night shifts became common. Workers labored under dim gaslights until their eyes burned. Children, too, were drawn into the sleepless rhythm of industrial life. The medieval night, once a time of prayer and peace, was now filled with smoke, noise, and exhaustion. Humanity had turned the dark into a machine. As technology advanced, the night became ever brighter. In 1807, London introduced gas street lighting, and within decades, cities across Europe and America followed. The stars disappeared behind a haze of human light. Philosophers and naturalists wrote mournfully of this new blindness, a world that could no longer see its own sky. The night had lost its depth, its silence, its power to humble. It was no longer infinite, it was illuminated. Sleep itself began to shrink, the ancient pattern of first and second sleep. The gentle rhythm that had guided human rest for millennia collapsed completely. People now slept in one long stretch, usually shorter than before. The midnight waking, once a time of prayer, reflection, or quiet talk, vanished. In its place came a restless tossing, an inability to fully surrender. Doctors called it nervous wakefulness. Society called it progress. By the late 19th century, the electric bulb sealed the night's fate. Thomas Edison's invention turned darkness into permanent day. Streets gleamed, factories glowed, homes burned with light long past sunset. The night, for the first time in human history, ceased to exist. The eternal day had begun, but so had a quiet epidemic of sleeplessness. People who once found comfort in natural darkness now found themselves haunted by the glare of invention. The body, ancient and rhythmic, could not keep pace with the artificial sun. Psychologists began to study the effects of sleeplessness, anxiety, depression, hysteria. In older centuries, these had been called spiritual afflictions, cured with prayer or rest. Now they were the diseases of civilization. The new insomnia wasn't born from demons or curses. It came from clocks, lamps, and unending noise. Humanity had traded the mystery of night for the tyranny of wakefulness. Yet even amid this sleepless modern world, traces of the medieval lingered, like ghosts clinging to the edges of electric light. Some people still prayed before bed. Some still dreamed of angels and omens. The old rhythms lived on in the body's secret memory. For though we had forgotten the art of two sleeps, our circadian hearts still pulsed with ancient echoes. We still woke at midnight sometimes, feeling the strange, nameless peace of an hour that once belonged to both heaven and man. The medieval people, for all their fears and ignorance, had known a truth we lost, that darkness was not merely absence, but presence, a living, breathing force that shaped the soul. They feared it, but they also honored it. They believed that sleep was sacred, a bridge between worlds. We, in our brilliance, have crossed that bridge and burned it behind us. Now, in the 21st century, our cities shine brighter than ever. Our nights are filled with screens instead of stars. We sleep less, dream less, and wake more, but we do not rest. The night, once a gift, has become a burden. We lie in our beds, surrounded by artificial light, scrolling, thinking, worrying, haunted not by spirits, but by our own creation. The medieval man would have looked at us in disbelief. How strange, he might think, that a people so powerful cannot sleep. And perhaps, in that thought, lies the last whisper of the old world. Because deep down, beneath our glowing cities and sleepless minds, we still crave what they once had: the darkness, the silence, the surrender. The medieval night may be gone, but the longing for it never will be.